Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue, shalom. My name is Neil Davis. I am a graduate of the Technion Faculty of Medicine, and I'm currently the Chief of Pathology at Cornwall Community Hospital in Cornwall, Ontario. I'm proud to be hosting this webinar with my fellow Technion Canada Ambassador team, Jeff Lowy, a tech matchmaker and global biz developer, and Esty Zaks, mortgage expert and science buff, who's not able to join today as she is off exploring the jungle. Everyone, can you wave hello? Jeff? We're thrilled to be here with keynote speaker, Associate Professor Uri Lesmes for this special program presented by Technion Canada. Personally, I've been a member of the Technion Canada Council and am currently the chair for the last 2 years. My commitment to the Technion stems from my passion for science, technology, the state of Israel, as well as, of course, my own personal involvement with the institution, having graduated from there. That's why I'm proud to serve as an ambassador for Technion Canada, a national organization dedicated to raising funds and awareness of Technion Israel Institute of Technology, which is Israel's oldest university and one of the world's leading science and technology universities. Let's all take a look at this short video, which highlights some of the innovations of the Technion.
The Technion is a unique institution that combines a medical school with science and engineering. It takes innovation from the lab to the market. Its scientists pioneer wide-ranging cures, revolutionary treatments, and instant diagnostics. They learn from nature's forces and help to counter man's. The Technion's inclusive policies ensure education for all. Established 36 years before Israel's independence, the Technion helped to build a nation. Its ethos is to inspire all students to be the best they can be and to foster and share the brilliance of its professors. It powers Israeli high-tech and puts Israel at the center of international business. Technion sponsors fund scholarships for the brightest minds. They contribute to the creation of world-class facilities and state-of-the-art laboratories, as well as essential research and equipment. The Technion raises the scientific bar. It helps advance the technological revolution, overcome medical challenges, and improve the lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world. Support the Technion and be part of something truly great.
Okay, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to call upon Jeff Lowy, my co-moderator and co-chair of the Toronto Council, to introduce our guest of honor, Associate Professor Uri Lesmes. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So I'm so happy to be here together and proud partner with you and the team to create a better and healthier tomorrow. Thanks, Yuri. I had the privilege of personally visiting the campus in Technion in Haifa, and it's truly Israel's crown jewel of science and innovation, and the university's contribution to the state of Israel is great, and to the world has been immeasurable. Now to introduce the man of the hour, Associate Professor Uri. And Yuri's been head of the lab at Food and Chemistry and Bioactives and Food and Innovation Center, both at Technion Faculty of Biotechnology and Food Engineering. He's also the academic leader of Israel's Pan-European Accelerator Network, aimed at promoting food entrepreneurship and startups. He earned his bachelor's and doctoral degree at the Technion. Prior to joining the Technion faculty in 2010, he was a visiting scholar in the Food Microbiology Science Unit at the University of Reading in the UK and a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Food Science at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Concerned with healthy, affordable, and eco-friendly food choices, Professor Lesmes works in the rational design of foods, personalization of food solutions, and safety of food additives. Yuri is also experimenting with insects and algae to create high-protein, sustainable food alternatives. He and his team have created ice creams made with silkworms, falafel enriched with eco-friendly nutritious algae, spirulina, and meat hybrids fortified with byproduct of agricultural crops. I bet you all guys want to learn more. Please be sure to type in your questions on the chat feature at the bottom of the screen so that we may know that your questions and get them all noted down. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Yuri.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? Neil, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. So without further ado, I'll just greet you guys with an appetizer before lunch or after lunch or during lunch, depending on the time differences across Canada that you're in. And I'm here actually to talk to you a little bit about processed foods and the big concept running through the public, whether processed foods are a health hazard or an opportunity. I'd like to start off actually with my own personal intake on this entire story. When I think about the problem, I think of the challenges that we have up ahead. And the drivers of my research, you can see at the bottom left of your screens. That's my family. My kids, my wife, my in-laws, etc. Because the world is changing. We all come by and leave something behind us. And for me as a scientist, it's looking around me and trying to see what are going to be the challenges of the future and how we can try to do good science that matters and that could help alleviate the challenges or even tackle them to a great extent. And we see it all around us, the booming population, the fact that being elderly now is actually now considered even an offensive word to call somebody an elderly person. The fact that the world is dichotomous with the malnourished kids in the Far East or in Africa or Central America, etc. And in other places of the same planet, you can find obese kids that are overfed and yet still malnourished and with imbalanced diets. And that is not even to speak about urbanization and pollution. But for me personally, as a food professional, I mostly focused on understanding what food does in the human body. My lab actually focuses on bridging two gaps, and that is what is food, or trying to understand what's in our food. That's on one hand. And the other hand is who's eating the food, and the diversity of peoples, and whether we can precise the nutritional solutions that we're offering them. And we try to do this by trying to bridge these gaps through research, asking the simpler questions that were very, very hard to even tackle about a century ago when the food engineering discipline emerged. Actually, it spawned itself during wars. The onset of the food industry actually came during a war, and I'll talk to that about. And I'll talk about it in a minute. But if I were to ask you guys, what's the story with modern foods and with processed foods, this CNN headline that was online May 30th, 2019, actually echoes a lot of the public opinion. And that is that ultra-processed or over-processed foods are too easy, too cheap, too affordable, too accessible for us, and they could be killing us by just overeating. And that's actually was highly debated during that time. And that's not very long ago, but if you really think about it, it's prior to even COVID. But this actually relied on epidemiological studies showing that people that have a diet that's rich in what is called ultra-processed foods actually have an increased risk for certain things like diabetes, obesity, chronic heart disease, etc. And that is actually across the Western world, the US, Canada, the UK. There are studies done in Brazil and in Australia. And those actually are quite concerning because epidemiologically, when you look at populations, when the diet's imbalanced, you see a lot of artifacts and you see a lot of morbidities coming into play, and that's not a good thing. So perhaps modernization is not leading us on the right path. But funny enough, that same month of May 2019 was also a very big hit on NASDAQ. And if you follow the news, the economical news, that same month was the launch of the first stock exchange shares for Beyond Meat, an alternative protein company that produces a vegan or a vegetarian sort of plant-based products like burgers, sausages, etc. But when you dive deeper into these things, you see that they actually collide because that NASDAQ launch actually was the best financial investment for 2019. They actually, the debut was insane. People buying that stock actually made a lot of money. But now people are already starting to ask, okay, what's in these products? What are they? Who are they? The fact that they are from a vegetable source or a plant-based protein source doesn't mean that they haven't been processed. And if you dive deep into the label, you'll find the list of ingredients that actually classifies these burgers as ultra-processed foods. So the same month when we were talking about how ultra-processed foods could be bad and killing us, we were actually very, very excited from the protein alternative to meat, which is bad for the environment and bad for your health, depending on how much you eat of it, etc. So the world offered a dichotomous solution where we might be actually, again, finding a solution that's not necessarily the optimal one. But when you're trying to look into things, my own perspective is not to go into hysteria, but rather into history. And that is to try to think, why is food so important to us and why processing is important? When we look on what makes us human and what is so unique about us compared to any other species on this planet is the fact that we are not herbivores, we are not meat eaters, we are actually coctivores, which comes from the word coccere, which means in Latin to cook. We are the only species on this planet that eats cooked food. So communication, you can find chimps that communicate very nicely, dogs, whales, etc. You can socialize, gorillas can socialize as well, but we are the only ones who eat cooked food. And why is that so important? Because we have a big brain. We have the largest brain compared to our body weight. It's only 2% of the body mass, but it consumes 25% of the energy or the calories that we eat. So it's a very metabolically expensive organ. And why is that? Because we can consume enough calories, because we cook them. And through cooking, we unleash nature's potential to give us energy and to give us nutrients so that we can survive. And once, as a living organism, we can survive, we can then think of thriving. And thriving means more brain power, more time to do webinars, to think of new drugs, new solutions, hybrid cars, you name it. So this is the historical or prehistorical reason why processing is good, because the leap in the size of the primate brain actually occurred when we discovered fire. So when we started to cook food. But modern food actually initiated back in the 1900s. If we want to be exact, with this very nice caricature of Nicolas Appert, a French guy who decided to take on a challenge by Napoleon and to invent something that we all have at home even today, and that is canned foods. Napoleon offered 12,000 francs to whoever can find a solution how to preserve food so that the army can take food rations with them. This guy came up with the idea, let's take food, put it then at that time it was glass jars, put it in boiling water. The boiling water actually sterilizes to a certain extent the food, and the food actually has a much more a pronounced change and improvement in shelf life and its stability. And that's the onset of the food industry. The early 1900s were actually accompanied by, okay, that's great. How can we make a lot of it so we can feed everyone? So it was about making a lot of food. That was the trend in food engineering from about the 1900s to around the Second World War. After the Second World War, the world was actually saturated with the war, and everybody just wanted to eat and have a good life and live in peace. And that's when people started to think of food, which is an elemental part of our lives, because we have to consume it to live, otherwise we will die. So people started to think of food as a service. And then that's when people started to think of freeze-drying coffee and TV dinners and all of the things that we now can enjoy as products, and the frozen dinners, etc. So that was after the Second World War. And that's when people started to think, okay, how can we make a lot of it? How can we make money out of it? Because when you think about it, no one does and goes to work pro bono. So that was the age of service, food as a service. But now we're in the 21st century. And now the biggest word is care. We realize that food is actually the biggest bunch of chemicals we intake on a daily basis. And that's why product engineering and people actually diving into ingredients. Now, even if you go to a supermarket and ask any common Joe what they think of fat, or what they think of carbs, or what they think of cholesterol, people will have an opinion, or what's gluten, or things like that. So people are much more savvy, or think they are savvy, about what's in their food and what it makes for them, and whether it is good for them or bad for them, etc. So there's a lot of change coming into the 21st century, but also a lot of progress, because we have these really cool looking cell phones, a lot of computational power. So we can even revisit old questions that were very, very complex and intricate to try to even tackle about 50 years ago, and now we can solve them, in a matter of seconds, because of the computational power that's at our fingertips. So what's so good about food processing? And excuse me for being proud for you guys at Canada, staying there. So you can see it in front of you. A lot of Canadian offerings, but also canned foods, bread. Who of us actually makes their entire food at home? Practically almost no one. So we buy it from somebody else. So if you look at the statistics, 200 years ago, half of the human population on the planet was involved in the food chain, whether it is as farmers growing cattle, or as retailers, or people selling, or people, by being part of the supply chain, truck drivers, etc. Now, only 7% of humanity is involved in the food sector, which means that we actually released over 40% of the human population to do something else. And that is an amazing number, because it means that the 40% actually includes Steve Jobs and all of those guys inventing new drugs, new computers, new cars, you name it. So they didn't have to worry where they will get their food. So they had time to think, and they had the power to think. And that is thanks to food processing, because food processing offers us safety, offers us increased food preservation, which actually diminishes food waste to a certain extent, obviously, offers us convenience, accessibility, affordability, which is a big word today because of the global changes in economics. Now the financial power of most people is lowering, and people are now looking for the more affordable food solutions. We're talking about regulations. 200 years ago, when you bought a food, you didn't have a clue about what's in it, what are the calories, whether it has a lot of fat, less fat, a lot of sugar, a lot of salt. No one knew. You just knew if it was tasty for you or not. Now we have food labels. We have regulatory agencies that actually are responsible for monitoring this. So we, as professionals, are fighting to ensure the resilience of this food sector so that we can still maintain our modern lifestyle. But where's the problem? Because when I teach students how to innovate for the food sector, the first thing I tell them is find the problem, then start looking for a solution. So let's start with looking at the problem. What's been going on in recent years in terms of caloric intake? Because we consume food for calories, for energy. We extract a lot of nutrients, and these are actually converted to energy that our body uses to exist, to move around, to do all of the things that we do. So if you look from the 1970s to around 2010 at Americans, you see that their caloric consumption actually rose significantly. And why is that so concerning? Because as a living entity, we actually produce or consume energy just by even sitting on a chair. And that's why we have to eat. How much? Around 2,000 to 2,500 calories per day. If you are sedentary and you don't do a lot of exercise, that's roughly the number that you should be aiming for. The problem is, if you look closely, is that the caloric intake of Americans over the decades is increasing steadily. And more than that, they're consuming more fats and oils. They're increasing the fraction of cereals and flours that they consume, as well as sugars and sweeteners. So the diet is actually increasing the number of calories. And if you just look at it as a black box, you're putting in energy. So if that person is not taking out the energy will actually be accumulated. How? As fat. And that's why we see the rise in obesity. Now, how is that actually geographically translated? So we're talking about a normal, healthy adult individual who needs to consume between 2,000 and 2,500 calories. Those are the red lines that you see here in front of you on the screen. This is the area where we need to be. And if you look closely, the US and most Western countries, we surpass the daily caloric intake by far. Americans consume almost 4,000 calories a day when they actually need not more than 2,500. You know what? If they exercise a lot, perhaps even 3,000, but not 4. And that's why Americans are getting obese. And this is actually a pandemic. And more than just a pandemic of obesity, we also see a rise in hidden hunger, because they're not just consuming too many calories, but these calories are not the right ones. They're not the ones that we need. So you see deficiencies in iron, deficiencies in vitamin D, iodine, magnesium, a lot of nutritional deficiencies in people that are obese. So the world is going a little bit crazy with what we're eating, and we're actually consuming this planet. So if we're trying to look into the future and what are we missing? So the USDA actually did a survey to trying to generate dietary guidelines for Americans into the future. And they actually have a very worrying report on all the different analyses of the nutritional portfolio of Americans. But as you can see here in the red boxes, these are differences between the blue margins are actually what is recommended intake, and the purple dots are actually the real or the average intakes of Americans, and that's according to gender, males and females, across different ages along the healthy lifespan, from adulthood, the age of 19, all the way to the other extremity of life, the older adults or people over 60 and 70. And as you can see, there are a lot of gaps between what we need to consume and what we're actually consuming. And one of the biggest gaps are in fruits and vegetables for Americans, and most of the Western world actually follows the same trends of the Americans. The Americans lead the way, but we're all pretty much there as well. So we're under consuming vegetables and fruits. Certain parts of the population are not consuming enough protein or enough dietary fiber. It depends on how you analyze these data. So we're consuming what we think is enough or even too much, but not of the right things. And those are some of the problems that concern me as a scientist, trying to find ways to offer people new ways to bridge these nutritional gaps. And what more concerns me is that a lot of the offerings that we can find that come in, for example, in this research that we've been leading, is to understand also the growing use in food additives. Because, for example, if we wanted to produce an ice cream that's low in sugar, it's not just make it with less sugar, because sugar plays a lot of different roles in the ice cream. So it's also very important for the texture. It's very important for the stability of the ice cream. So if I were just to take out sugar, it wouldn't be enough. So I have to put in food additives to compensate. And these food additives sometimes are not as straightforward as we think. And this story is one of our ongoing studies looking into a specific food additive. And we found that beside the fact that the intake of this particular food additive has increased over the years, it's actually soared from the 1970s. It actually, by 2 orders of magnitude, has increased among Americans. And a recent study, we even found that children and toddlers and adolescents actually consume by far more than what is recommended. We started to look into, okay, should we worry? And we found that this food additive in certain foods can actually increase the permeability of the gut, which is a bad thing because the gut's supposed to be airtight and very, very controlled. It actually hinders protein digestion. So we think we're eating enough protein, but our body actually cannot digest this protein because of the food additives. So this is quite worrying because we're thinking we're putting in harmless chemicals or harmless food additives that sometimes can come from the natural and the most harmless of origins. For example, this particular food additive comes from algae, and who doesn't like sushi and all of these marine sort of products? But when you take the actual compound out of the algae, you isolate it, concentrate it, and then, for example, put it into a yogurt or put it as a food additive in ice cream or in a low-fat cheese, it actually affects our body's ability to digest the cheese or the yogurt, etc. So that's kind of worrying that perhaps we're trying to cook up ideas, but are we cooking up good solutions? That's one of the things that concerns me. So where do we start? So first of all, we start by realizing that processing is not bad. And this is a very superficial look into, for example, plant-based proteins. And the green bars that you see in front of you is their digestibility, how well they get digested in the human body. And the green bars are when you eat the plant-based origin raw, and the red is when it's processed, meaning cooked or processed to some extent. And this is a review that appears in several scientific publications showing that it doesn't really matter how you cook plant-based products, or for example, oats, for example, chickpeas or beans, as long as you cook them, or even if you process them like they do in industry, for example, with technologies like extrusion or microwaving, you always increase or improve their digestibility. You make them more digestible. So again, if we were talking about unleashing the potential of nature, cooking doesn't mean that we're cooking up bad ideas. Sometimes we're actually unleashing nature's potential. So what are we trying to do in respect to our own research? We're trying to cook up food tech to become the next high-tech industry, because the 21st century offers us a lot of different tools that we didn't have in the past. And we're talking not even 30 or 40 years ago, sometimes it's even 15 years ago. For example, when I did a study on the gut microbiome, trying to look in the bacteria that's in our gut, about almost 20 years ago, we had to quantify the bacteria by hand under a microscope and have markers identify the different bacteria, and then just with clickers like on flights and just click and count them manually. Today, you have high throughput technologies that can do thousands of different species at the same time and at a fraction of the cost. So we have a lot of more robust and much stronger tools to tackle problems, and this actually grows exponentially. From my own research, I'm focused at the gut, because the gut is the intersection of us and the food. The gut actually is the forefront, or the frontier, if you'd like, where our body fights and deals with the food. So what does the gut do? It has digestive functions. They break down the food into elements that can be selected to be uptaken into the body. It defends us from, for example, pathogens or contaminants that we don't want them to infiltrate into our body. They release these compounds from the food matrix and then control their uptake into the bloodstream. They signal to the body if we've eaten enough, or are we still in deficiency of a certain type of food, and then they induce either hunger or cravings. And then once we're done with whatever we eaten, it gets released. So we excrete it to the toilet, whether it is through defecation or through urination of some of the chemicals that we've ingested. So that's what we're trying to look into, because the gut is an immense system that has a lot of different functions. It also has immune functions. It actually even has neuronal functions, like a small brain. So when people say gut feeling, maybe they're not so wrong, because there's a small brain hidden in the gut of every person, because there are so many neurons along the gastrointestinal tract that this can actually be equated with the brain of a small cat, which is an amazing thing to think about. And that is before we even started to talk about the microbes in our gut, which actually outnumber the number of body cells that we have in our body. So we're actually, if you think about it numerically, we're actually more bacterial than mammalian. But how can we harness any kind of thought to design foods or to master food production? We hold that there are actually three very, very good avenues to explore. The first one is to assemble structures, because structures, just like a building, they determine the functionality of the building. The same applies to food. The structure of the food is very, very detrimental to what the food does in our body. So we need to find ways to engineer food structures. The other thing we can do is master processing, well, how to cook. Not just to make it tasty, but also to find the fact that processes actually affect chemicals that are in our food, nutrients, etc. So we need to find ways to master processing operations so that we can control or direct their functionality. And last but not least, can we use chemical reactions that occur in food, and can we direct them towards pathways that are beneficial to our health and to the environment? So just to give you a glimpse of a story, what you see in front of you is the story of starch. Who doesn't like pasta or bread? We like it because our body knows that actually these starch architectures actually harbor carbohydrates, which are a good energy source for our body. Actually, they are a central energy source. 90% of the carbs, roughly, that we consume are digestible, and about 10% are indigestible. They are called resistant starches. These resistant starches are part of what people know as dietary fibers. They're also good for us. So even foods that we don't digest can be good for us. And we focused, for example, in one of our studies on digestible fractions, trying to attenuate the rate that sugar is released from the food so that it doesn't really impact blood sugar levels to a great extent. So we focused on developing slowly digestible starch, and that slowly digestible starch can be even introduced with chemicals inside the flour that can be released during digestion and give us an extra value. So we're developing functional foods that give us values that are beyond the mere nutritional values of the food. So how can we actually offer values beyond nutrients? Just looking at it from the pharmaceutical approach, trying to think of food as a delivery vehicle for other moieties, non-nutrients that can be beneficial to our health. And for example, a lot of them do exist in our foods. And we've been realizing this in the world of research over the years with a lot of studies identifying the culprits of a lot of the beneficial effects of different foods. For example, wine, which is good for us, actually has been found to contain a chemical named resveratrol, which actually confers a lot of the benefits of the wine, or EGCG, which is a very short abbreviation of a very complex chemical found in green tea, which also is very good for us, or quercetin in fenugreek, or beta-glucans in oatmeal, which is good for our cholesterol levels in the blood. So it helps lower them, or actually helps us control the right levels of cholesterol in our body, or glucosinolates, which are part of the chemicals in crucifiers like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, or capsaicin in chili peppers, or curcumin found in turmeric, or different roots that can contain a lot of chemicals that have beneficial effects that and can help us actually fight off a lot of the adverse effects of the environment and aging processes, etc. But a lot of them also carry bad tastes. For example, capsaicin. Capsaicin is the chemical, the pungent chemical of chili peppers. And I don't know if you like spicy foods, but not everybody likes them. And that particular chemical is actually very, very good for gut health. The problem is people don't like it when they eat it. And when it comes in the chili pepper, it also comes with a lot of other parts of the chili, which could be bad for certain people. For example, lipopopulations like people with Crohn's or colitis. But the actual capsaicin can be good for them. So can we deliver the capsaicin without the chili pepper? That's a challenge, because capsaicin as a sole entity is actually pepper spray. Not very pleasant. So what can we do? We devised a program to use proteins, which are good for us, to create nanoparticles that are actually translucent when you put them in a drink, for example, and then drink a glass of something that looks like a juice, that actually contains a lot of chili pepper in it. You don't feel the chili, or you don't feel the pungency, because it's actually encapsulated in these proteinaceous particles, which in the gut actually get degraded and then release their content and actually help us deliver this chemical to the body. But what else can we offer? Well, one of the things that started to worry me about almost a decade ago was the fact that my parents and my grandparents, and now all of them deceased, I wanted to find better solutions for them so that they can age gracefully and have a normal life and enjoy meals and etc. So I started to dive deeper into what's the relationship between food and the healthy aging processes from infancy to basically to death. So the difference even for one individual, when they were an infant and when they grow up and when they become an elderly person, will not be the same needs and not the same capabilities. So what can we do? So here's a nice story. First of all, we wanted to understand, okay, elderly people, how do they digest food? Is it the same way that young people do? The answer is quite obvious, no. But we wanted to quantify these numbers, and that's the great advantage of Technion. Engineering, let's put a number on it. So we put a number on digestibility, and we actually categorized proteins as fast and slow digesting proteins, and actually showed that a fast digesting protein that is readily digestible in a healthy adult can become a slowly digested protein in an elderly person, which kind of makes sense. But a readily digested or a very digestible protein in a healthy adult can become a poorly digestible protein in an elderly person. So it's not an easy way to predict which protein would be best. And that's why we were so excited that we found a way to actually do this. And then we went on to explore our ability to generate protein-added ice cream or protein-fortified ice cream, because who doesn't like ice cream, right? And elderly people need a lot of protein, but they don't want to consume a lot of food. So we wanted to play around with a few solutions. And one of them, my student's suggestion, was let's make protein-added ice cream. But we wanted to use a very, very cheap and very sustainable protein. So we used insects, and we produced an ice cream that's fortified with proteins from insects. And what you see here as a spider plot at the bottom right was actually the scores from tasting panels trying this ice cream, reaching to the conclusion that the ice cream is first and foremost delicious. And that's the most important thing about it. Because when people were confronted with the fact that the protein came from insects, they said, but it tastes good. So that's a big hurdle, especially in the Western world, where insects are considered to be dirty and something of a taboo. But if it tastes good, no one really cares. We even ventured off to produce breakfast cereal, which are custom made for seniors. And you can see here experiments done with the tasting panels of seniors living in the community, trying these breakfast cereals that are actually completely commercially viable. So this is a core shell made from plant-based proteins and a lot of dietary fiber and a tahini-based filling enriched with a lot of valorized byproducts of the olive industry here in Israel. So a lot of value added, and it simply tastes good. So people actually like it. What else can we say about this? Well, one of the things that we wanted to ask are simple questions. For example, what's the difference in the picture you see in front of you? Two people trying to digest food. Well, sometimes the obvious question is just in front of us. One is female, the other one is male. Apparently, in the world of nutrition, the advice given to males and females about diet is eat more of this, eat less of that. You need less calories, you need more calories, but the food has never changed. The thing that changes are the advice of how much to eat, what type of selections to make, but we never actually tried to master the actual food product so that it's better suited for a male or better suited for a female. So we asked ourselves a question together with one of my students, one glass of milk or one apple. So if you take Adam and Eve, for example, and both of them ate the apple, right? But would that apple have the same digestive fate in Adam and in Eve? That was one of the things that actually drew our attention. And to get the answer, first of all, we needed to get Adam and Eve into the lab. The problem is that most people don't really like us experimenting on them. So we devised an in vitro model that you see in front of you on the left side of the screen, bioreactors that actually recreate the human digestive conditions. They are computer controlled. They have been programmed to do the entire set of important physiological functions of the human gut. And then we can feed them with whatever we want. And in the morning, we can operate them as a female, clean them up during lunch, and then after lunch, come back and operate the same bioreactors as a male. And then challenge them with that apple or with a glass of milk. Our first study that was actually conducted earlier this year, just the story actually evolved and unfolded during COVID. So we developed the model theoretically during COVID, and then we went into the lab when all lockdown was alleviated. We came back to the lab and actually set up this model very fast because a master student had to finish her degree. And she was extremely hardworking. So she immediately went to work. We set it up and we challenged with a glass of milk, if you'd like. So to keep it simple, we started off with whey proteins as isolates. So just one individual, and we started with a lot of advanced analytics called proteomics, which look into the fractions and how the proteins get degraded. And what surprised us was that the answer was quite obvious. Males and females break down the protein differentially. But then we looked in and asked, okay, does this difference, for example, that you see here on the screen, in the profiles of the proteins that are broken down, and pink obviously is for females and blue is for males. So there are more peptides generated in the female gut compared to a male of a certain protein, and vice versa. And the reverse was found for a different protein. So we ask ourselves, are these differences, should we care? Could they make a difference to Adam and Eve? Our eureka moment was when we dove deeper into the actual essence of these protein fractions. Apparently, the ones that are highlighted here in the boxes, numbered 16 to 62 and 113 to 137, these are the serial numbers of the sequence within the protein. Basically, they just say which part of the protein that is, but that particular part was actually part of a fraction that affects satiety. So if you think about it, and this is why this work was very rapidly published in a leading journal in the field of food science and nutrition, was the fact that it raises a question whether a female, whether Adam and Eve would feel satiated differentially from the same food, because then it means that perhaps we can re-engineer the foods so that to get the right outcomes in females and in males, so to have a differential food. So let's talk about innovation for a moment. So where can we take it? We can take it into using or utilizing novel ingredients to a better extent. So talking about plant-based, talking about trying perhaps even to mine exotic origins like spirulina, which is an algae, insects, trying to find exotic roots like maca or teff, grown in Ethiopia, which is a gluten alternative to flour, or buckwheat, or any sort of different origins, and trying to really understand how we can master their digestion and get the most out of them, not just from the nature, but actually exploit their full nutritional potential to feed humans and to nourish our bodies. We need to also think about technologies. How can we actually transform these ideas into reality? And how can we cook up foods, perhaps better ways, perhaps use alternatives to fire? Because fire was discovered 170,000 years ago. And if you look closely into it, this is a hidden technology that we use in our homes almost on a daily basis to heat foods, but this hasn't really changed over thousands of years. Perhaps we can now find new ways to cook food. And we are exploring those sort of avenues at the Technion. For example, using high pressure to boil an egg. So instead of boiling it in boiling water, we can actually produce a hard-boiled egg at room temperature just by using high pressure. just by pressurizing the egg. Or, for example, using electric fields to actually sanitize foods. So a lot of different technologies can emerge. You're using UV radiation to sanitize surfaces. So a lot of high-tech solutions can be introduced to actually innovate our food chain and how we handle foods to get the most out of them. And that is before we even started to talk about science fiction and cultured meat and dairy without a cow and meat without a cow or fat without sheep, etc. Or just thinking about the use of cameras in our cell phones to take a picture of our food and then use an algorithm to analyze the nutritional potential in that particular food. So we won't even need food labels. We'll just need an app and scan the food, even vegetables, and know their nutritional values just by using a sophisticated camera. But there are a lot of challenges still ahead because we have a lot of things that we need to consider. We need to consider safety of food, sustainability, the nutritional values, the diversity of foods. We don't want to eat the same things all over again and again. We need to make sure that it's affordable to everyone, that it's a resilient food system, talking about wars and COVID and lockdowns, or just having the same options for our kids as well. I'm concerned with the fact, for example, that my grandchildren will not know the taste of a burger because it will be either so expensive or so illogical to eat burgers that they won't be able to enjoy this. And burgers actually have benefits. So they're not completely bad. So can we balance the good and the bad? How can we do that? And that brings me almost to my conclusion. Because as you probably realize, I'm just one person. I won't be able to tackle all of these problems. And the FAO has defined global goals like no poverty, zero hunger, and we need to tackle them working together. And that's why I'm so proud of being part of the Technion and the faculty that I'm part of, because we want to tackle these challenges together and have a lot of interdisciplinary research to deal with it. And these are my partners in my department. So as you can see, we're also very, very gender balanced faculty, which we are very proud of. A lot of different people from different disciplines. So we have people from tissue engineering in the same department with a synthetic biologist, a physicist, and somebody working on food packaging, and a biochemical engineer and a chemical engineer and a microbiologist, and everybody is sitting in the same department and listening to the same seminars, pushing around ideas, trying to generate innovation. You can see in front of you a lot of buzzwords from different fields, and all of them are actually explored in my department. So we're talking about food science, food engineering, nutrition, biotechnology, classical biotechnology. We're talking about molecular biotechnology, applied biotechnology, biomaterials, big data, applied genomics, bioinformatics. We have faculty members, and we are a tiny faculty. I don't know if you remember, you just saw a slide, 21 faculty members. We're only 21 professors, but we are very, very eclectic in what we do. And this is the stronghold of our faculty, the fact that we are so eclectic. And that brings us to our excellence. For example, in education, educating engineers. You see in front of you a lot of happy faces. These are students, our excellent students winning award-winning projects. The first place in 2018 was the al-galafel, the falafel with added spirulina proteins. First place 2020, an alternative to disinfection of juices, using actually a virus, just like COVID, but a virus that attacks the bacteria that spoil juice. Or the 2021 cohort, winning with an oat-based cheese spread that actually looks like cheese, behaves like cheese, tastes great, but it's completely based on oats. So Technion is trying to generate a lot of innovations there. We also support accelerating companies like 3D printed steaks. We're also trying to make this an innovation. And you see in front of you one of our most valued projects right now. We're trying to transform what I call the Food and Health Innovation Center. Now it's going to be transformed thanks to a very generous donation from the Carasso family here in Israel, a philanthropic family here in Israel that actually donated the initiating seed funds to transform our existing center that you see at the bottom left, now under construction. This picture was taken this month. So as you can see, complete mess. But by October 2024, we hope to have the Carasso Center for Food Tech Innovation that will be one of the largest in the world, with over 3,000 square meters of pilot scale equipment to innovate for the food sector and the health sectors, with 4 different arms. One of R&D facilities, an industrial test kitchen to make tastier food solutions, a visitor center where we will engage the community, and a startup center where we will actually nourish the growing startups. And Israel is an enormous hub for food tech innovation. Actually, it's only surpassed by 2 countries in the world in terms of food tech innovations. Number 1 in the world is obviously the US. Second in the world is Switzerland with Nestle housed in it. And the third in the world is tiny little Israel. And Technion is one of the leaders in Israeli food tech, in the food tech arena. Which brings me to the conclusion. My own story is trying to use science, so from understanding how we digest food to offering manufacturers and entrepreneurs with ways and tools how to design and how to produce healthier food solutions for all of us, for our kids, for our grandkids, to ensure the food safety of what they do, to ensure that we offer and we think of foods for healthy aging for the future, and how to personalize these foods so that we can actually maximize or optimize the use of natural resources on this planet, so that we deliver the right apple to the right Adam or the right Eve at the right time. And that's a challenge that we need to try to address today. So with that, I leave you with my bottom line. Big challenges require collaborative efforts. If you want to make a meal, it's never about one dish, right? The same applies to these problems. Our solution is a combo meal, and pardon the pun, but this is one of the great things about my profession. I can use a lot of puns. So we're offering a combo meal of excellent science and Technion creativity, the Israeli chutzpah, trying to think of what are other people missing out? What haven't people thought of? What can we do that's new? And that's what we try to install in all of our students, in my co-researchers, in my lab, in my teammates, etc. And hopefully I was able to give you guys also some food for thought on how perhaps you can either change your lives or help us help others change their lives as well. And with that, I leave you guys and I stop the share screen.
Thank you so much, Professor. We are astounded by your research and your innovation. And I personally am also very impressed with the passion that you bring to your work and presenting your work. It's clear how proud.
It's just good food. Who doesn't like good food? I mean,
well, yeah, but it's clear how proud you are of your work, and I think that's a well-earned way to feel. So, thank you very much. We are a little over on time, so I'm just going to ask one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
How has your knowledge in this field impacted your own personal eating choices?
Tremendously. And actually, it stimulates me to try to constantly change what I eat. Usually when I end talks, people tell me, okay, give us 2-3 bottom lines. What should I eat or what shouldn't I eat? And I tell them, well, first of all, try to never eat the same. Second of all, which is the things that I've learned from my own studies, and that is that diversity of diets is actually good for us because the body gets used to what we're eating, and then it goes numb, and that's never a good thing. We have to keep our body on its toes. So keep changing. And one of the biggest changes and the easiest ones to make is with color. Color your food. Eat greens. Another day, eat reds. And one day, eat a lot of carbs. The next day, eat a lot of protein. And on Tuesdays, you can completely ignore meat or make it a meatless Monday. These are good things because that sort of playing around with our body, trying to trick it, is actually keeping it on its toes. And like any good car, if you drive it every once in a while, it doesn't go bad, right? If you keep it in the garage and you don't use it, eventually when you try to start it, it will act up.
Yeah. Can you tell us any particular food startups that have come out of the Technion that you know that we can learn
I'm
more?
actually very proud to share with you guys that my own department is actually spun off a lot of different ones.
Okay.
And one of the nicest ones that I can tell you guys, and I'm proud, I'm the father of 2 girls. I don't know if you remember the first picture, but 1 boy, 2 girls. And I'm extremely passionate about trying to promote female success in this world and trying to educate my girls that you can do anything you want if you want it. 3 of my co-professors, 3 of them females, established a company called Mitafoa, which is a cultured meat company. And that's just one example. They established it this year. Aleph Farms is also a great success coming out of the Technion from the Shulamit Levenberg lab in biomedical engineering, again, from the Technion. Is actually one of the largest contenders globally in the field of cultured meat. So we can pride ourselves with a lot of chutzpah, trying to generate innovations just by connecting the dots that people sometimes just don't see. And we don't have other options, Being Israelis, we're not a big country, not a lot of resources. So we do with what we have.
Thanks so much again. I'll pass it to Jeff to close out the session.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Yuri. Thanks, Neil. So yeah, we ran over time a little bit. So I'd like to thank Professor Lesmes. A sincere thanks for spending your time. Perhaps you can come back and answer some additional questions, because that was for myself, and I'm sure for others, there's a lot of questions. For all those who have joined us, it'd be great to see you in Israel, or if you'd like to get involved with Technion Canada, send us a note. If you are going to Israel, we can set up a visit with the Technion and perhaps even visit Yuri's lab. And yeah, since we're running out of time, I'd like to just wish all of you good health and happy Hanukkah.
Yeah, happy Hanukkah. Enjoy the foods of Hanukkah. Right? Think about it.